You're super echoey.
That's because you're also on the Zoom, but we should be live now at this point. And then I'm going to leave the audio in the Zoom, and we should be live and good to go. Awesome. And I'm going to post the link over on our Discord as well, and then we'll get started right away with AI that works. This topic. Are you ready, Dex?
I'm ready. We're live.
All right. What's today's topic, Dex? Give us a rundown.
So today's topic, we are going to talk about using coding agents, using Bash versus MCP for tools, which has been a debate that's going on a lot in a lot of places. And I think I want to just dig under the hood because, like most things in AI, the answer is there is no right answer. And the correct answer is to understand how the models work under the hood, understand how the harnesses work under the hood, and of course, do a little bit of context engineering and really just understand the tokens you're putting into the model and taking out of the model.
I think that's one of the topics that I have been seeing happen more and more over in it's just popping up more and more everywhere that I see right now. It's happening over on like Twitter threads all the time. I was just talking to a user over on the I was just talking to users over on like the Discord, and they were talking about how UUIDs cause like a huge problem as well. And it's just like all this stuff is really just about simplicity. I don't know if anyone's noticed. Claude Code has actually renamed their Bash tool to general purpose. Like the words.
That's the task tool, right?
The
like general
purpose
agent
tool that they added recently. And I
think that's the subtask agent.
Yeah, the word, but they renamed it, and I think the reason for that is it's just a better name, and a lot of people underestimate how important these names are. And I think when we talk about MCP versus Bash, I think that's the first thing we should talk about. Why don't we start off with something really basic, which is when we go start off with this, I want to start off with a whiteboard that really outlines how MCP is actually working under the hood. Yeah, exactly. Off was mentioned. I was just talking about this. Like 60K tokens right in your context window. I think the best analogy for this is, before we go really deep into it, is really going to be package management software. So if anyone's ever built a website, you've probably seen the extension that tells you how big an NPM import is that you're making. And like there's some that are like 65 megabytes and some that are really small. And as of right now, I think no one really cares if you use a megabyte in your package. I mean, you shouldn't. Please be nice and don't do that. But in practicality, it doesn't really matter on today's machines. But like 12 years ago, it did matter. And I think that's kind of the world we live in with MCPs versus Bash. Is like MCP in theory is really nice. It's basically a package management system for prompts, is kind of how I view it as. But the problem is, if you don't know what prompts are happening under the hood, you're stuck in this world where instead of making a website slower by having a massive package, you've accidentally made your agent less accurate by having a massive prompt. And that's really the fundamental issue that I think people run into. And like slowness is kind of bad, but like you can get around it because at least the website functions the same. But accuracy is literally a user quality hit. So I think that's why this conversation is getting a lot of upbeat more recently, is because the accuracy problem is effectively unbounded in terms of difficulty.
Yeah. And so I want to jump right in. We have a quick episode here. So when you launch a coding agent, and we'll be talking about Claude today because that's the one that we have the most experience with, but everything we're doing is true for Codex, true for AMP, true for OpenCode, any CLI you would use. Your context window and your agent's ability to do good work in it is completely and directly proportional to the size of your context window. I think we have Jeff Huntley on stream today. I think the way he put it is very clear and succinct. I don't think anyone will argue with you. The more context you use, the worse results you will get across the board, no matter what. Obviously, having missing information or incomplete information is bad, but in general, the more you can keep it concise with the right information, the better. So when you launch a Claude Code prompt, and I'll show you kind of what we'll look under the hood here, actually. Let's see. I'm actually going to share my whole desktop. So AI that works circle of trust. If you see something you shouldn't, please unsee it and tell us so we can.
Twitter Dex. So
we're live on Twitter.
Yeah.
I'm not really. I don't trust any of you anymore. Sorry, we're big time now. So one thing that you can do is you can look at we have this project here on AI that works. Why does StreamYard insist on hiding the window when it does full screen? So all the code for this episode is here. One of the things we've written is a small reverse proxy that you can run in Docker that will just proxy all your Claude traffic and then write it out as log files. I don't have the log files here or directly, and actually,
you might have one of them over. I think I saw you
in the other episode. Yeah, I didn't push them.
For those of you that haven't seen the Claude code files, like when you actually go look while Dex pulls it up, some of the stuff that they add into the system prompt is actually quite interesting. For example, Claude will actually tell the model the Claude.md file should be followed unless it's not relevant, in which case don't follow it.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
Is this the one?
Sorry, yeah. So this is one of the traces. I have to scroll over because I did a search.
Just copy the line and then we can just JSON format it.
Well, so what I wanted to show you is basically part of what's in your context window, right? So the thing is a list of messages, and the tools get listed in as you have your bash tool, you have your glob tool, you have your grep tool. So there's all these built-in tools, right? And then you'll also have any MCP tools that you add in. And so let's see if I have any of these in here. So yeah, here's the linear MCP tools. So you have a bunch of JSON and schemas that explain to the model how to use these different tools. And so like this doesn't get injected into the context window
for a second there?
Yeah.
I want you guys to take a look at this. See the name? The name is MCP linear list cycles. Like it's not just that you're injecting stuff into the model, you're also injecting random names that Claude has to use to like differentiate stuff to pass it into the model. Like, why does the model care that this thing is called MCP linear list ticket? Like, if I only have one thing for getting documents and it's purely linear, I could just call this get document, and it's going to work effectively very, very similarly. In fact, it'll probably work better because again, it's not about these small naming differences are exactly why Anthropic had to rename their tool to general purpose away from a broader like subtask, because the names really make a huge difference in accuracy.
Well, and just to like clear that up, also like the if we look for we can find the task tool here. If my search.
You want to just copy this and paste it into a JSON prettier?
No, the problem is that this proxy logged things with a serialized JSON thing.
That's okay. You can just unserialize the JSON if you copy and paste it. I'll send you the website.
No. Just hang on. There we go. So the task tool has a prompt and a description right now, but in a newer version of Claude, they added like subagents with names, and so general purpose is the default name for the task tool in newer versions of Claude Code. And this prompt is a little old. So I just want to clear that up. There's a general purpose subagent that is to differentiate from any custom subagents that you might have. But because in the old world there was just task and there was no name parameter in here. But I want to get back on track here. So we have all the built-in tools like bash, grep, glob. We have then the MCP tools that you might add, right? And I'm just going to go through a couple examples with Claude. So this is like linear list issues. And we're going to do a really simple example today, which is essentially around, let's go find it. What's the difference between using a CLI to talk to linear to get an issue versus, oh no, this is what I get for writing my readmes in NeoVim and not setting up actually a bunch of good NeoVim plugins. So we're going to look at just a really simple Claude command here, because you can actually, without even doing the proxy stuff, you can see the output and the tokens used, and you can use that to count the tokens. Embedded in these messages is basically something that looks like this. And so what we care about the most is cache creation input tokens, and if we sum those up over a session, then we can get kind of a clear picture of how many tokens were used in that session. There's a little script in here that will actually parse this output and make it useful. So you can steal this and use it. It's really quite simple. But we have our assistant message, and we created 6,000 tokens here, and then it read that file, and then it's going to write that file. And so each one of these is some n number of tokens that is the actual like JSON of the tool call. Does that make sense? Vaibhav, questions? Yeah. Okay, cool. So you can also do something cool where if you run the exact same thing again, you will actually see that this is not an episode about caching. We went really deep on caching when we went through the Manus paper. But if you use the exact same user message and the same set of allowed tools, then you're actually using the cache the whole way through. All of these calls are exactly the same, and so we're not actually writing any new tokens to the cache, which is both cheaper and faster. But if you bust the cache by changing the user message, you can see a slightly different output. So because I changed it from write foo to bar.txt to please write foo to bar.txt, everything that comes after my user message is recomputed. And so it didn't do all 6,000 because the Claude system message is still the same. And the Claude.md is still the same. But somewhere in here, I think that what happens is the user message comes in before the tools and stuff. I don't know exactly the mechanics of it. We can go look at it. But the idea is if you only change parts of it, then you get to reuse parts of the cache. Cool. Does that make sense so far? So now what I'm going to do is I have here the MCP linear thing. So this is just a simple MCP config to add linear to our app. And so I'm going to run this one now too. Oops, not that. And then I'm going to pop back to the whiteboard in a second. But we'll see here is we're going to add way more tokens to the context window. Yeah, so there's 18,000. The difference between linear and no linear is about 12,000 extra tokens. And so if you think about your total context window, what we talk about a lot is trying to keep it below like 40% usage. And so rather than like having Claude work for a long time back and forth, we just say like have Claude do one thing, have the agent do one thing, get it right, and then start over with a fresh context window and have it work on the next thing. And so that means that even though this entire context window is, 200K tokens minus 32K input tokens, which means you get a total of like 168K to work with. So 12,000 tokens, let's see, is 7% of your context window. It's not crazy, but if you go start putting like 6 different MCPs in there, you are eating up, a fourth of, and like you're already basically like your system prompt in your Claude MD is what? So we added 12, and then we have like 6K in the base. That's assuming you have like a tiny Claude MD, right? This is very small right now, and this is telling it to use the MCP tools for linear. And so when I'm going to skip the CLI part for a sec. We'll just do this one. So I'm going to ask it to fetch an issue from linear, and we'll see how many tokens that takes. Actually, I haven't tested this part. I'm going to check are there any questions in the chat while we're going through this?
We've got one that I really like.
Let's do it.
Which is, what are these extra tokens? Like, where do these 18,000 tokens come from? And I think the best way to actually show that off is, can you just pull up the JSON right there? Can you open the JSON really quick, the linear JSON, the linear thing that you pass in?
Yeah, and we'll actually pull it up. I'll show you how to use the MCP inspector. Let me just, because we can also look here.
Yeah, but I want to show just the JSON really fast, if you're able to. Just the MCP.
So if we look in, you want to see the JSON, like the actual request?
No, I want to see the linear MCP file.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
cool.
MCP linear.json, exactly. And then can you open that file, the MCP linear/SSE on the browser?
No, but I can do you one better. Inspector.
Let's see what this does. I assume this is going to have a nice little UI on top of the...
Exactly. Yeah, this is how you can, so we can connect here and see.
Do you just want to open the browser? It'll be just to open it really fast. Yeah.
Oh, it's SSE, not SEE. There we go. So you can list out the tools. So there are names and descriptions, and everything you see here is being passed into the model to tell it how to use these tools. So the description of every field, the description of every method, and the name of every method. And there's just a lot of these, and some of them have very complex, list teams has all of these like sorting and filter params. So every single word in here is a token. Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Exactly. So like when we got asked this question about like what are all these tools actually coming from? Like the problem is unlike unlike a website where like every single div you put in really doesn't make it to the user, it does make it to the browser. And when you render every div, you could have like 5 divs less nested with each other, and the browser will render it and it'll look the same. If you have a really old computer, having like 50 divs nested will be worse than simply having a single. That will be much worse than having a single div if you don't need it. That said, from an end user perspective on today's computers, it doesn't matter. But today, when you're doing this with an LLM, every single word you put into that MCP server is literally making it to the LLM. And unlike browsers, as of right now, these models are not good enough. You got to forget the slashes. This is why we use
Oh.
syntax highlighting and why we use a programming language.
No, we're using a whiteboard today, Vaibhav. It's gonna be fine.
Yeah, but like the point here is like from an end user perspective, this thing doesn't matter. Like who cares that this thing has 5 divs? No one. But in the world of an MCP where you have 50 redundant words, it's actually hurting your performance because the model has to actually look at it and it has to do computation to decide that word is actually irrelevant to this request. It's not merely so if you go back
You want
to
to
the
go to the
MCP
inspector?
thing, in this case, all I wanted to do was just get an eng ticket. Why do I have to know that I have to list teams? It's totally useless information.
And you can tune this a little bit, right? Especially with subagents, you can like disallow or allow certain tools, and then you're going to get less in the context window.
But that's all manual. You can't actually do
Yeah.
it. You can't actually disallow tools.
Think in subagents, it will not be shown to the model if you put it in disallowed tools.
Oh,
So we can
but
actually test this.
You have to pass that in though. That's
Yeah,
important.
you have to. You have to engineer it. You have to say, okay, like here's my context window. If I want to save 1% so I can get 1% better performance, then I'm gonna only put in this 4 MCP tools from Linear that I use, and I'm gonna like hide all the other ones. But you have to understand how context windows work. You have to. This is the engineering part.
Exactly. And I think this is really where the MCP versus Bash debate really get started, which is that if you are using MCP, the problem is you don't get to control exactly what bits make it into your context window, or it is at least very difficult to control what bits make it into your context window.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're using Bash, you now live in this world where you have to kind of reinvent everything, or the model has to reinvent everything. So, like to make a linear request, it has to do a curl on the linear API, and if the model is trained on it and it knows what the linear URLs are, then great. But if it's not trained on it, now you live in this world where you have to run multiple iteration loops to go figure out what that is. And I think that's really the duality of this whole debate of like, which side do you prefer on? Do you prefer on the model becoming less accurate because you're bloating it up? Or do you prefer on the model being less accurate because it doesn't know how to use the thing you want it to use?
And this is kind of the chart you kind of like to draw a lot, which is like, do you want, the like curves, right? Is like, how much engineering effort do you want to put into this? It's sort of like for low effort, you can get something like this. Oh my God, I'm so bad at drawing with a trackpad. And then if you want to do a little bit more engineering effort, you can kind of like collapse this in and narrow the range of potential outputs or narrow the range of performance. I don't know if that's how you're thinking about it.
Yeah. The only caveat is you usually draw it with a slightly higher peak in the middle. Because if you're narrowing it, you're usually doing it because you want a better outcome. So you're getting way better outcomes for the area of the domain you care about versus a more generalized outcome in more domains. And both can have pros and cons.
Yeah, exactly. If you take away half the linear tools, you can't do as much stuff on linear. But if you only want to do those things, then engineer it and just focus on the things you want to focus on.
Exactly. So it's not. So I would say like the bait conclusion that I don't know about your conclusion, Dex, but like the main conclusion that I've had about MCP is I am very happy to use MCP stuff that I have written I'm very unhappy to use stuff, MCP stuff that other people have written. Because when
Yeah.
I write it, I know where it is, I know where the code lives, and I can go edit it myself to make it actually not hurt the prompt or not hurt the coding agent. But if I use someone else's stuff, then I have like, can you pull up the GitHub MCP just so like really make or like Jeff's blog post on this?
Yeah. What was the one?
G Huntley, and I think he talks about like email. If we can't find it, just pull up the MCP for it. Just
Jeff, put the link in the chat.
Yeah. If someone has a chat link, just post it in there. But like, just look at the GitHub MCP server. And
Yeah,
like
let's drop that one in the inspector. I hate that this thing doesn't tell me how to use it.
So put that over into the inspector if you have it. And I just want to like get people an idea for like how insane this MCP is. And like, if anyone's using MCP with GitHub, I would be surprised if it worked in any modicumly complex task. MCP room.
Yeah, we'll try this one. This is like the dynamic client registration thing. We can try just doing this.
Does it work? Okay.
Does not support dynamic.
I can just look up the. And I think it has like the actual prompt in here really fast that you can go see. I mean, if you just go down and just go down the GitHub, you're gonna see it right here. Go to the GitHub. I'll show you what it is. And just scroll down. Let's just look at these tool configurations. Let's just look at how many they have first.
God.
Like, look at this stuff.
Yeah,
it's giving it and this is just the docs. This isn't even like the MCP format. I promise you, the actual MCP is not this short. It's going to be longer than this. And like, well, no wonder you just spent 60K tokens of your context window doing this. And if you're using 128K model by chance, and you're not using one of the 1 million context windows, well, duh, it's not working. You just used half your context window just to describe it how to use the GitHub.
So, and it looks like they do have flags for hiding and removing stuff. So you wouldn't even have to wrap this. But like, if you care and you only want to work with issues, then you can probably trim it down quite a bit.
That's if you're running the GitHub MCP on your own. That's only if you're running the GitHub MCP server on your own. If you're using when would you not be running it on your own? Well, you might be using like an MCP remote and using someone else's GitHub server. And this also requires you to know ahead of time what your MCP services are. So like, let's imagine we're in a world where I'm going to jump back to the whiteboard. I'm running a bunch of GitHub commands. Sometimes I git commit, sometimes I git pull, sometimes I track issues. I do various things. Now I have to spin up a different GitHub MCP for every single instance that I want to go call the model on. It basically boils down to either me prescribing everything ahead of time, or me somehow training the model to do this. And I think the very interesting point that Jeff made was like, instead of actually passing in the GitHub MCP, you can just use the GHCLI, which the model is very, very well trained on. You don't need an MCP in this scenario, because if you ask, like, I don't know, just ask Claude to like dump out the GH command for like getting a specific issue. There you go. Using GH, I mean, this is going to work. I guarantee you it's going to one-shot this on the first try, and you're not going to have any issues. Exactly. And I don't know what model you're using. It's like, cool, this is Opus, but like, it doesn't matter. Sonic can one-shot this too. And so, so what I want to get into in the time we have left, and then we'll make time for questions, is basically like, how do you get around this and how do you engineer around this? And basically what we've done at Human Layer is we've written our own kind of wrapper around the linear CLI that lets us, it's not only that it's not an MCP, it's just a CLI, because Bash is pretty good if you're using a coding agent, you don't really need more. But basically, this lets you control every token that comes out. And so we are using basically like Markdown. We're pulling out the fields that we care about, and then we're just pulling the Markdown. And then if you want to get the comments, you just have another flag for getting the comments. And that all happens outside of the model, versus if... so yeah, here's a bunch of comments on this issue. This happens to have been open for a while, so there's a lot of comments on it. But if you want to expose this stuff to the model, I mean, this is pretty dense, and so I might say, like, you know, tell the model to fetch it into like a ticket.md, and then it can read it incrementally or whatever it is. But this is so much more flexible because you're not forced to push the inputs and outputs through your model's context window. The model can just use Bash and stream everything into a file and then read the file incrementally. You have it there. You don't have to call it again if you don't want to. And so what this means is, like, if we go and we run this with our token counter, we can kind of compare the, like, I want to just see how this works, but is like,
If we ask it to do, I'm just going to do missions because I'm not convinced that the actual the white labeling of MCPs is working as I expect it to. But we can grab this one and say fetch the issue and all comments, and we'll see the huge difference in token usage between using the MCPs and going back and forth versus just I'll run another one over here, which is we can take, there's like another Claude MD linear CLI into Claude.md, and so instead of having a shit ton of MCP tools, we have this really tight, very small, very token efficient description of like, here's how to fetch an issue, here's how to fetch it with comments. And instead of 12,000 tokens, this is probably like a max 100 tokens of like, here's the tools and here's how to use them. And so let's see. This was 24,000 tokens to fetch it. I think it actually probably used the bash tool. It didn't even use the linear MCPs. Damn. All right, we'll have to post. We'll get the prompt right and we'll post it up afterwards. But if we do it this way and we do the same thing and we just take out the linear MCPs and we have this new Claude MD that says use the CLI, we should see far less tokens get used in the cache creation.
So like, Dex, what would you say is like the general summary that you would tell people here? Like, what is like the general takeaway? Is like, when should someone use MCP in your mind?
It's like if you don't know how to integrate the API, or you don't want to, or you don't have the time, or you want to do an experiment, then like, yes, you can totally just use the MCP, play with it. But then if you're using something all day in your workflow, and like, it's the same thing we talked about last time in this like hierarchy of leverage, right? Is like, the more something impacts your workflow, the more you should care about it. And so like, I put your MCP tool somewhere down here. If everybody on your team is going to be using something every day as part of their workflow, then it makes sense to engineer it, because if you make it 1% better and use, instead of using 2% of the context window, you use 1%, or instead of using 7% of the context window, you use 1%, then that's going to have massive cascading impacts across your whole team. If you're like, let me play with this and see if this works, then yeah, just use the MCP because it's off the shelf and it just works. It's the same thing as like, if you were going to pull an NPM package for, a sorting algorithm, and then you're like, okay, this is actually the core, most important loop in our code, so we need to write our own version of it, because algorithm is a bad example because there's like a specific reference implementation, but something performance sensitive that's going to be in a really tight loop, then that's when you need to think about spending more time optimizing it. And this is what we talk about all the time, right? Vaibhav, your example is like, yeah, use O3 to solve the problem until it's either too slow or too expensive, and then go figure out whatever prompt is going to help you use GPT-4o mini to do the same work with almost as good results, right?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. Actually, I echo that 100%. Like, and for me, candidly, I found it more work to go dig into MCPs than to just like write a bash script, because like Claude Code will just churn out a bash script real fast for almost everything I want to do. And like the MCP becomes more overhead because I have to go figure out how to go set it up and learn it really fast. And when it doesn't work, debugging becomes a problem for me. So at least whenever I have tried, I found the debugging loop is bad enough that I found it just useful to just start with bash by default, or like custom scripts whenever I'd go do this. And I actually don't have any MCPs installed on any agent that I use personally.
Well, and it depends what you're doing, right? If you on the runtime, if it's a coding assistant and you can dynamically expand the runtime as you need new things, then yes, of course, why would you go use something off the shelf if you know exactly what you want and you know enough to review the scripts and make sure that it's correct? I think where MCP really, really shines is in allowing people who don't have the will or the time to extend existing software. So if you have like your cursor window here, and like I know how to use Cursor, or maybe it's like Claude Desktop or whatever it is, and I want to just fucking connect this to all my stuff, but I'm not, a super, I don't know why I chose to do a dark mode theme here.
If I'm not comfortable in code, then it's going to be really annoying for me to go connect that all the way down through. Exactly. Steve made a good point. It's like, if your APIs that you don't know very well, or like if you're not familiar, if you don't feel comfortable with like software as much, because like AI has enabled you to go explore software in a way that you couldn't, then it's really good. The browser use MCP sounds really interesting. I haven't personally tried it. People have tried Playwright. John saying in the chat. So I do like the premise of that. And then like I found that like personally it's just like I don't know, my opinion is just like all this stuff while it's nice is just it slows you down unless you have a good developer loop. If the thing you're doing is writing code, then the thing that matters most is how fast can you know the code is working or not working. And if you're stuck debugging the thing that is generating the code for you, that is a much slower iteration loop than actually stuck debugging the actual code itself.
Yeah, I like that. Cool. What other questions?
Have we got questions for people today? Dex, what I'd love to do with like the remainder of the time is actually like let's look at the plot system prompt while I go pull up questions. I'm gonna show this. We got a question.
Yeah.
For someone. What are the best resources to build MCP or something like Zapier? To be honest, that problem is not as hard as you might suspect. In order to go build that out, there's actually a small little piece of code that we have in our past examples. Let me share my screen. I'll show you. And I'll show you guys where that example is so you can take a look at it. Share screen, cool. So in one of our past episodes, we talked about this. MCP. We talked about,
the like how to select from 1,000 MCP tools.
Exactly. One of these is this one. I don't know which one it is. All right. And we actually talked about this, and we actually have code samples of actually how to go run this. It turns out writing an MCP loop is actually pretty straightforward. You just need a way to turn OpenAPI specs into prompts, and then a way to receive those prompts and feed it back into the OpenAPI spec. So when Dex was showing the example where like the linear tool was named MCP _ linear _ list issues, that's simply because a Claude code CLI needs a way to remap. Like when the LM selects that tool, they need a way to remap and pick that tool and actually execute it through the MCP agent. So like the code you end up writing actually ends up looking something like this. I'll just write a quick little pseudocode here, which ends up being like let agent equals call.
I think, do you mean to be sharing your editor?
Oh, I'm not sharing the right screen. Okay, I'm sharing another screen now. Response equals like call agent, user message, tools. And tools has to be like generate load MCP file. MCP.
And then you connect to the server, and then you talk to it, and you get its list of tools, and then you pass that into your call. And that's all that's happening.
It's an OpenAPI spec, so all you're doing is parsing that, turning it into some data model, and most people can read JSON and turn it from one JSON to another JSON, so you go do that. And then you just say like, for tool in response, if done, if response, else what you do is like, you just say like, tools dot lookup tool dot name or something, and then like run. This state append result, and then you just put this in a while loop. That's all an MCP tool call is. You load your tools from an agent from a file. You have some initial state, which is a user message. Then you call the agent or call an LLM with a bunch of tools and the state passed in. Then you check. If your tool indicates you're done, return the message to the model somehow. Otherwise, you in your tools registration, you look up the name that the model selected, and you pass it to you pass in the parameters that the model selected, and you run it. And then you get the result, pass it into the state, and keep on running this in a while loop until you're actually done. So hopefully, Harsh, that answers your question of how someone would go and build this out along the way.
Yeah, this is a good thing to just kind of jam into your brain. Yeah. It's like, if you have not this is how agents work.
If you haven't written this while loop, write this while loop. Like literally, don't use a framework. Just like write the while loop. If you're curious how to do it, we have a bunch of examples in our podcast of how to go do it. But like this is like the crux of how models agents work.
Okay, I have more fun context window stuff if you want to pop back over.
Yeah, I'll stop screen sharing. I'm going to go catch up with other questions while you go do that.
Cool. So someone did share Jeff's article. This is definitely worth a read. And he just did a talk that I posted on Twitter recently. But it's basically like A tool is just a description of what the fields are and what they are. And so you can figure out what the tool is. And all the models have their own way of serializing tools into the model. And especially the closed platforms, it's kind of like you don't get good visibility into it. But you can count the tokens. And every single like word in your tool description or your argument description matters to the model. And so like when Reddit comes up and says like, hey, we must have these MCP servers if you're going to work, and then you can look and you say, okay, the GitHub MCP server, 60,000 tokens. Memory MCP, 10,000 tokens. Like you put all these in there, and this is literally straight from Jeff's talk, but it's like you put all these in there and you're literally starting at 100,000 context usage. You're using all of your like useful part of the context window because again, remember, like your context window, this is like the money section of your context window. This is where you're going to get good work done. Everything goes downhill after here. And so if you're starting your work with your first user message at like 60% context window usage, you are never, ever, ever going to get good results from Claude Code. Like maybe for simple stuff, maybe in like really simple code bases or like new projects, you can get it to do stuff. But if you load in 50 MCP tools, like it's all about like, yes, Claude makes it easy to just get going, but if you don't understand what's happening under the hood, then you are going to have bad results. And so understanding this stuff and understanding like, yes, the long context models can do needle in a haystack really well, but most of the general performance drops off pretty quickly as you add more tokens. Oh, cool. And Ethan has a spreadsheet of which of these and how many tokens they put in.
They just take a large amount. Actually, Alexander asked a great question. It's related, but not, and I think in a way that Alexander probably did not expect, which is how do you deal with thoughts on images in prompts or other things that are going on? And I have a lot of opinions on this person. I'm sure Dex does too. But I'm going to take over the screen, Dex. Share the screen, and then, funnily enough, we actually talked about this in not too long ago, which is when we talked about multimodal stuff.
Yeah.
The fact is, like, images can sometimes take up more tokens to describe what you want, and sometimes less tokens to describe what you want. It really varies, but sometimes it can be incredibly powerful. If you're doing web development, an image is likely going to help describe the mistake that you made to the model way better than a visual will. If it's a very small thing, words will probably just do good enough. But like if it's a very complex thing, like move this thing over here, the image will just...
Or like, if you really don't understand web development and you can't, like if you know how CSS works and you're like, oh, we need to add padding to that node, then you can say that. But if you don't know how to explain that to a model because you don't know the difference between margin and padding, which is me, then give it the picture and it'll be like, oh, I need more padding.
Exactly. And I think like it's really a nuance. But honestly, images work really well. People that aren't using, I might have this thing running. It's like, check this out. Like this is a straight up image off the model. It generally works off the bat. So like, boom, phone call, extract. And this is straight up live running off the model. And models are really, really good at image processing. All right, and there you go. And it just pulls stuff out. Like if you're not using models for image processing, you're hurting yourself. Go do that.
Yeah.
At least in my opinion.
Yeah. All right, I got one more thing on context windows, which is that Claude system prompt stuff. And this is what you can figure out by actually like going through the traces itself, because this won't come out in the Claude JSON output lines. But like you may have stuff that always goes in your context window, but you should know that in your Claude MD, it is injected with a very specific message. So whatever you put in your Claude MD, it will be added at the very end. You will get this thing, which is basically like, do not pay attention to anything in Claude.md unless it's super relevant. And most of the time you should ignore what's in here, which is why, I don't know if you found, you put certain things in Claude.md, like always run the tests after making a change, and it kind of only does it like 10% of the time. This is why. And I think this is a product decision from Anthropic, and I understand why they did this. It's probably because most people don't know how to write a good Claude.md, and in many cases, oversteering the model is actually more harmful than understeering it, because the model has emergent capabilities. And so like you'd rather de-emphasize the inputs from an unskilled prompter than like risk that they basically just tank the performance by having a rogue sentence in Claude.md that ruins everything.
Exactly. That's why they have this. And it makes sense, but like if you're a skilled prompter, it's hurting you.
Yeah, and so this is why actually like you should know what's in your context window. And what I do is I actually craft the context window. So all of my instructions, I don't put them in Claude.md. They're actually dynamic based on the files in the repo. Because context engineering is about blending deterministic and non-deterministic code. This is what we always talk about, like where do you use the LLMs, where do you not? And so I actually have a slash command in one of our repos. I think we talked about this on the Claude for non-Claude like usages, but there's a slash CTX that basically says run this make task and then run this make task and then do whatever the user said. And so it's like if I run slash CTX with some specific instructions, the first thing it's going to do is run this print context, which is literally just going to cat out the contents of a bunch of files that explains, we use this to like run the company and run our CRM and stuff like this. And so it's going to cat out a bunch of files that show, okay, here's what we've been talking about recently. Here's our key metrics. Here's the last couple investor updates, things like this. And so this is crafting your context window. You're telling the model the first thing you do is you like output these things, and it's dynamic, right? You could put it in a file and just have it output it, but what I really want is I just want to take the top 200 lines of these like couple files. And then you can also like write code to generate the tree. And so like we have a file tree here that is basically just like, here's every single file that is interesting to you that is like sliced and filtered based on the markdown. We use like markdown front matter a lot. So this is a file in our CRM. And so it's got a bunch of like fields at the top that you can parse for slicing and dicing. And then we can just like, okay, the things that match the filter, print the file name and the summary from the file itself. And so like, this is again, like crafting your context window. This is the bigger picture. And like, this is the thing that even as the models get smarter, even as the coding agents change, like as long as we're still on like transformer based LLM technology and we don't have any like huge breakthroughs, this will matter for a while.
Yeah. That said, I'll push one counterpoint there really fast, because I do agree with everything Dex says, which is the models are changing at a rate that I personally did not predict. So it's possible that today's context limit is around like 40-60% according to Dex in terms of how good it is. It might be tomorrow's models are good at 60% or 80%. So like what I find is useful is I just try and push the model. Like sometimes I'll just toss in a bunch of context and just see how well it deals. And like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So like while it's good to have a general rule of thumb, what I find is it is definitely good to always text yourself as well. And thanks for the feedback. By the way, John, thanks for the feedback. We'll fix the audio next time and get it working. I'm not sure why my audio is softer than someone else's. But just like keep on pushing the model to their limits. Push in 100K tokens and see if it works and does what you want. Push in easy tasks, push in hard tasks, and just see what it works.
Talking about models evolving as rapidly, do you still use SAP in production instead of function calls?
Everyone that uses BAML does, and it works pretty well. It actually, we tested it on GPT-5. We have better performance on tool calling on GPT-5 as well. And I think it just boils down to the same basics. It's like describing the tool to the model just gives you better results in general, and not requiring JSON will generally always give you better results.
What is SAP?
A little off topic, but sure. What is SAP? For those of you that don't know, we'll show you guys really fast. Screen, I will share a browser window or a cursor window. What's the next question, Dex, while I pull up this?
Kind of a side note. Is BAML likely to support OTel at any point? I can take this one. Actually, maybe I shouldn't. I have hacked BAML by there's like a modular API where you can separate the request and response, and if you hang out in the BAML Discord, there's a bunch of people who have gotten it to go to any, because it's just key value pairs. You can send it anywhere.
Yeah. What is SAP? SAP is this algorithm that we have that says when you ask a model, in this case, turn an image or a string into a resume data model, which is described like this. SAP is this really, really cool algorithm that we have that says no matter what the model does, it will work. So in this case, I put backtick JSON, and we got to ignore it. But we can go further and say no quotes around keys. So like my prompt is literally this really, really basic thing. Add 3 reasons why this resume is a good fit, and I just changed the prompt from the previous. I'm still using the John Doe example. But now when I go run it, well, the model didn't listen. I'm using GPT-4 Mini, but this thing is not valid JSON at all. It has no quotation marks. It kind of has nothing. But we still pulled out the right data. So our parser is kind of like you can think of it as a SAP on steroids, or JSON.parse on steroids is kind of like how I would think about it.
Oh, so many DSPy questions. We talked about this a couple weeks ago about people combining DSPy's approach with BAML's schema line parser approach, and they actually work best when you put them together, which is exciting. Thanks for the abort controller. Yeah, that was a fun project we did. Um, as it started off as a bit, and then we decided to see how much code we could ship in one day. And I actually got to architect the Golang side of that because Claude was bad at fetching data from the internet about how to do idiomatic cancellation in Go. So thankfully, I spent 5 years building that at Replicated.
I'm
Um,
so sorry. My dog went bonkers because someone came into my house.
You are
Um,
all good. People are talking about how great the abort controller is. I think. Any final questions? Otherwise, we will wrap it up. And as always, we will post the code and the recordings and the next event on Luma within about 24 hours.
Javier's got a question. Does someone here know why the Gemini streaming model outputs sentence chunks, but word chunks? Well, one thing to note about how streaming works under the hood is the model is always streaming. The model only generates one token at a time. There's no way to make the model generate two tokens or skip towards that. What ends up happening is while the model is always streaming, the API provider that you're using chooses how many tokens to send you at any given stream time.
So they're
That is
buffering,
their
right?
prerogative. So unless you own the model, you can't guarantee when you get it. OpenAI may currently be giving you one token at a time. I know sometimes they give me 2 or 3. It really varies. Sometimes they give me 10. It varies. Like I would not build any amount of reliability ever in your application that depends on getting one token at a time. It would be a bad bet to make.
Yep. Sick.
I think there's a couple more questions. Let me see any. Did you give your opinions on DSPy?
We talked about, I forget which episode it is. We will find it and put it in the show notes. But we did talk about, someone posted a study where it's actually the best way to do this is to combine BAML and DSPy together.
Yeah. I think the idea of DSPy personally is really interesting. I view DSPy as like, oh, we don't actually want to go write the prompts. Maybe we can have something else auto-generate the prompts. I think that concept is actually really fascinating. But I think Dex, I think you made a tweet about this. It's just like we're in the early eras of how programming LLMs works. And like the early C compilers were just not that good. Like they just weren't that good because they didn't know what kinds of things people wanted to write in C, so they couldn't possibly optimize very well. You need some bake time to make these sort of optimizers really, really good. And sometimes a lot of this stuff is just like for example, MCP is this attempt for writing this optimized tech. In theory, Linear could sit down and optimize the heck out of the Linear API for accuracy and like make it make the words perfect. In that theoretical world, we should all use the Linear MCP because it is the best way to interface with the model because the Linear team owns that responsibility and optimizes the heck out of it. In practice, you end up in a world where it's not that good and someone just ships something really, really fast and it like looks like it works but doesn't actually work.
Well, and I don't want to talk about it in terms of like quality or craftsmanship even. I think it's the same as that like system message in Claude MD where it's like they kind of have to optimize for like what's 80% of the value for everybody because they know that people who really care about every single token can always go do it themselves. But I think the goal is like how do you give the most value to the broadest number of people?
Exactly. And like when I really think about this, it's like I just don't think prompts personally, my opinion is I don't think prompts are in a world where 80% is good enough because
Yes.
they're running. It's like CSS stuff. Like no one uses Bootstrap anymore because Bootstrap was 80% CSS. It's like it gets you the website, but like you can't ever use Bootstrap as your design system unless you're Twitter and that is your actual design system because it's not customizable enough. It's not maintainable. So then you end up using ShadCN because ShadCN lets you as a developer have a good starting point, but you get to own everything and edit it yourself. I think the premise that you will never want to read and you will never want to read the prompt and edit the prompt manually is fundamentally flawed. I think at least for the foreseeable future, and by that I mean like the next 12 to 18 months, is the furthest I would say. you will want to see the prompt. And you might want to have something write the first version of the prompt, but likely you'll want to hand tune it and to some degree, or at least have visibility into what it is in a useful and editable way. Just like we have wanted that with CSS. And it took us about like 20 years to make that conclusion about CSS. That like, hey, we don't want like a framework that lives somewhere in npm node modules that is write only.
Yeah, we don't want a component library. We want a platform for building component libraries. That was the right level of configurability.
Exactly, and I think it's the same with prompts. Personally, I think like you don't want a prompt library. You want a way to write prompts that you can edit and modify and do whatever you want, but have really good jumping off points by default.
Yeah. And I talk to really, really opinionated designers, just to like continue this analogy a little bit more. I talk to really good, really opinionated designers who care about every single pixel on the page, and they love ShadCN because they can apply every single style they want to every component and be guaranteed that it's customized. And they don't have to reach through some like artificial interface, which is like Bootstrap has an interface to it. There's things you can do with Bootstrap, and there's things you can't do. Whereas what ShadCN gets you is the entire spectrum, the entire solution space of every single class you could apply is available to you. It's clean and nice via Tailwind, and you have same defaults. But if you want to change something, there's no like reading the docs of, okay, how do I tell Bootstrap to apply padding to a component like this? You just look at it and you open the box and you set the padding. And I think the same is true for prompts right now. And the same is true for agents. Like a good agent framework will absolutely like give you the ability to reach into the box and customize everything.
Without having to read docs.
My phone's going
off. That point about reading docs is really important. I think Ariel asked a good question. It's like, oh, does that mean like DSPy changed that focus? I think DSPy does a really, really good job personally of getting people to start thinking about stuff as input-output pairs. But like, at least when I worked in machine learning, it's really, really hard to actually build a golden eval data set in practice. I think it's a good jumping off point, but again, it just goes off to like, it's really good to make an initial website with Claude Code or something else. But at some point, you always want that flexibility along the way. In general, I think flexibility has been really powerful. Exactly. I think John made a good point. Like generally, frameworks have becoming more flexible and opinionated versus frameworks that are becoming opinionated. Like I think opinions are like people want to go in. Like people are becoming more. People want to build more things, not less things, as time is going on. Nitin, you asked an interesting question. What about context 7? I have no idea what context 7 is, so I can't sadly answer that. But if you have a tidbit on what it is, then we can take a look for next time. Dex is off on a call. I think he's running late. I think we're ending the show today on this. If someone has a couple more questions, feel free to send them over on the Discord. Our Discord is generally open. If you have other things that you're interested in chatting about, definitely send us links on what we should chat about. This has been AI That Works. If you want to join the next episode, you can subscribe to this calendar over here, and we'll generally post new events every Tuesday at 10 a.m. PST as per usual. Look forward to the email, guys, and see everyone soon.